Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Mukilteo Beacon and the Mukilteo Chamber of Commerce, I want to welcome you to tonight's City Council debate. For those that were in the attendance last week, welcome back. At this time, I ask that you please silence your cell phone and any other device that may be a distraction to the candidates. Also want to announce that QFC has provided refreshments and they are in the back of the room. My name is Frank Foster. It's my honor to serve as the moderator of tonight's program. Tonight's debate is an information forum and does not represent the opinion of either sponsoring organization. The objective for the evening is to improve public knowledge on upcoming issues pertaining to Mukilteo. Hillary Clinton wrote, "Freedom means the right of people to assemble, organize, and debate. This is the goal of the candidates, to share their vision and to debate the issues, so that you will be able to make an informed decision on November 5th, or as I was told last week, any time that you get the mail ballot, send it back in." Let me begin by introducing the candidates. The order announced is based on the auditor's website. Position number 1, the candidates are Terry Preshaw, Ted Wheeler. Position number 2, Richard Emery, Bob Champion. Position number 3, Randy Lord and Fred Taylor. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, would you please stand for the flag salute? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The questions for tonight's debate come from the Mukilteo Beacon staff and the Mukilteo Chamber of Commerce. We will also take questions from the audience. If you would like to submit a question, please do so at the designated table in the foyer during the break. Unfortunately, due to time, we will not be able to ask all of them. Jean Marie Trapp will be tonight's timer. She will monitor the debate. Jean, if you just put your hand up so they say, where is she? There. She will monitor the debate and ensure that each candidate has an equal opportunity to answer each question. Candidates are allowed to complete their sentence once the stop signal has been given. The moderator will oversee this process. And we had a meeting beforehand, and I don't anticipate any difficulty in this area. If a candidate does not use all of their time for a question, it cannot be applied to any other purpose or a question. We ask that you please refrain from any overt demonstrations, comments, or outbursts during the debate, as this takes time away from the candidate, and we wouldn't want to deprive anyone of their allotted time. Please hold your applause until the break and at the conclusion of the debate. The candidates will have 3 minutes to share their opening remarks and vision statement. Following their opening remarks, I will begin asking the prepared questions. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer their question. Due to the number of candidates, we will dispense with rebuttals. The debate will conclude with each candidate making a 3-minute closing statement. Let's begin. The order for answering the questions was determined earlier by a random drawing. At this time, Mr. Wheeler, please share your opening remarks and vision statement. You have 3 minutes.
Can you hear me? Is it fine? First off, I would like to thank the Chamber and the Mukilteo Beacon for putting this on and their efforts that they've put together tonight. Also, Frank, thank you for moderating this. Jean Marie, thank you for timing it. Don't let me go over. Most important of all is to thank you out in the audience that's listening to us that came here and gave your time up to see what we have to say. I think that's very important. I'd like to start by letting you know that my family's been here in Mukilteo for 13 years, And my beautiful bride and I have been together a very short 23 years, and it just seems like yesterday that we got married, and now we have 3 children, all of course that graduated from Kamiak. And fortunately I have 4 wonderful grandchildren. Of course I think they're the most wonderful children there. One of the things that I find is I'm out of the box thinker, and I work well as a team member. I work closely with the staff in the finance department, the fire department, the recreational department, police department, Parks and Arts Commission as chairman, the Long Range Financial Committee, and I'm involved with volunteers through the community garden, the Japanese Gulch Group, the dog park, the Lighthouse Festival Committee and logistics, and Young Life. In the year 2000, I'm one of the founders of the CMC, that's the Construction Mission Crew. And what we do is we build orphanages halfway around the world for the underprivileged. And we find that we work in our backyard with them as well. It's important to me to volunteer because I've been blessed in many ways. And it helps me live out my dedication, loyalty, and commitment to helping others. Along the way, I've met many new people and made lifelong friends in volunteering. And it's always been a joy for me working with those that I can share my time and donations to. With 39 years experience in the business, I bring a strong, positive style of leadership to the city. It certainly has helped me out in the long-range financial planning because I found that the city is in pretty good financial shape. My vision is I intend to retire here in Mukilteo, and I look forward to the walk with my family on the promenade, trying to keep up with my grandkids, running mountain bikes in the Japanese Gulch Park, and I look forward to the ferry being moved so we can have some parking space down there so we can have our family and teenagers enjoy the amazing park of the waterfront. And this is Ted Wheeler.
Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. Ms. Preshaw, you have 3 minutes.
I want to thank you all for being here. My name is Terry Preshaw. I've been in this community, either in the community or along the periphery, next door in Everett, since 1993. I started the Mukilteo Community Orchestra in 1997. I was one of the founding members of the Mukilteo Lighthouse Festival Association in 2004, and most recently served as its president 2 years ago for 2 years in a row. Prior to that, I had been the PR chair. I've spent a long time in Mukilteo. I've been a volunteer throughout the community, starting with the schools. I taught Latin for 2 years at Mukilteo Elementary after school. I've coached French horn. I just love Mukilteo, and that is one of the reasons why I'm running. My vision for Mukilteo is that we are going to have a government with more transparency, more clarity, and we're going to make better decisions. Specifically, the way I envision us reaching this lofty goal is we're going to do our homework. That is, we will be performing due diligence for each and every municipal decision. We are going to balance that budget without siphoning off money from our reserves, without raising taxes, and in fact, I'd like to roll back some taxes if possible, specifically some of these utility and franchise taxes that our senior citizens are not very happy about. Lastly, my vision includes that we will be putting citizens and residents first. And what I mean by that, and what it means for you, is that we are going to provide better access for our citizens to our beach, to Rose Hill. We are going to put safety first and make improvements that are needed. We're going to look at chip seal and reevaluate that because, quite frankly, I am not convinced that that is a safe surfacing agent for our roads. And please feel free to talk with me about that later. Finally, in terms of where I want to go with the council, it is my goal to create a place of safety for us where accountability, trust, and credibility are the norm, not the exception.
Thank you, Ms. Preshaw. Mr. Lord.
Well, once again, thank you, Frank Foster, for doing this again. The Chamber and the Beacon, I appreciate your effort to support, in my mind, what this is an ideal democracy, where we get a chance to sit and talk and you get a chance to see who we are, where you really get to understand who is actually making decisions on your behalf. Another group I want to thank is the candidates, both the existing ones and the ones who are challenging. It is honorable to try to come and serve, and I applaud you guys. My wife and I have lived in Mukilteo for 28 years. We've raised our kids. They've gone through the elementary, the middle, and the high school. They're out. They've graduated, and they moved out twice. That's the key for a parent. The first time doesn't count. It's the second. So in that time, I've coached sports. I was a chaperone for elementary school. I was a band dad. I called things, taking kids across the state all the way to Austria. We have an amazing neighborhood. I've been a volunteer. I've been on the Lighthouse Festival board. I've been the parade chairman. I've been more or less the guy that doesn't do a very good job of saying no. A dozen years on Park and Arts Commission. Some of the exciting things we did is we designed 92nd Street Park. We designed Lighthouse Park. Most of the trails you see were a wild dream we had about 18, 20 years ago. And then all this experience means that I get a chance to understand what the needs of the citizens are, and it means that I get to know what's important to you and learn how your interest in Mukilteo is there. And it also gives you a chance to know who I am and to understand the kind of style and the way I work. At the regional level on the council, in addition to the things I've done, I've been asked to represent the city on the Regional Fire Authority, where we look to see what the whole region could do to see if we could possibly save money at the fire. Did that for 2 years. Also, most recently, the funnest thing is I've been 8 years on the Conservation Futures Board, where we actually try to preserve property across the entire county. And just this year, the county was able to spend $25 million. We did a full prioritization, understood, and we saved property all over the county, quite fun. And at the same time, we were still able to preserve the property here. And we just received a check for 2.5 plus an extra more, $3.3 million from this county to support what we're trying to do. So we're trying to save Japanese goats. Now at work, in my normal job, I'm actually a Boeing engineer and a project manager. And then I'm known as a consensus builder, where people call me to see if I can't possibly solve problems that are beyond what they can do. And then that consensus building is what I bring here. And when people, in fact, the council has seen it so often that they've asked me to be council president 5 times. And so I hope to earn your support. I think there's plenty more we can do. And I just want to thank you, and let's get Mukilteo moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lord. Mr. Taylor, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. And I echo the thanks to the Chamber of Commerce and the Beacon and the others involved in putting this forum together for us. I am originally born and raised in Spokane and moved over to Puget Sound area with my family in 1970, and have lived in Snohomish County for about 40 years now. I've lived in Mukilteo for 19 years. My children, 2 children, also went through the public school system, both graduated from Kamiak. I think I'll sit back a little bit. My background is varied, to say the least. I have been a professional and semi-professional musician since I was a teenager. I was born into a family that had owned and operated a very large public warehousing and trucking business for, I can't remember how many generations. I was the 3rd or 4th generation to run this business. At one time, it was the largest company of its kind west of the Mississippi River, and it was the first company of its kind west of the Mississippi to become computerized. So I have a background in transportation, logistics, a very strong background in computers, business management, accounting, personnel management, lobbying, working with utility commissions, rate boards, once I got out of the family business, or we actually closed that part of our business, and we branched off into some other things. And I had become interested in computers and around the time my son was born in the early 80s, and became, through a little bit of school and an unbelievable amount of hard work and study, I became quite an expert on computer technology, programming in a bunch of different languages and creating accounting systems and inventory management systems, and eventually branching into a consulting business where I was literally in the business of reworking how businesses keep track of information. It was called business process reengineering at the time, and it involved swallowing paper into scanners and turning them into data. What I hope to do here, if elected to the council, is bring some of this experience, management experience, and a rather wide perspective of ideas to the council, and try to freshen things up a little bit here. I have a lot of concerns, as you'll see from reading my information and hearing my opinions on these subjects. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Mr. Emery, you have 3 minutes.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight. I really appreciate everyone's presence and your interest in Mukilteo and its future. We are, I think, all of us, the people who will make Mukilteo work and help make it thrive. So I really appreciate your interest in what's happening. I also want to thank the Chamber and the Beacon for putting on this forum. This is one way for people to get to know what's going on. A little bit about me. I've been in Mukilteo for somewhat over a decade. Been happily married. I have 5 amazing children. 2 of them have been and are still being raised here in Mukilteo. I'm a small business owner, and I've been privileged to be on the council for the past 6 years. I got involved with that because of the Japanese Gulch. It looks like Japanese Gulch was going to get developed and paved, and a lot of people were concerned about that. That led to a suggestion from one of our existing council members that I apply for the vacancy that Mark Elias had left for go to the state, and I was fortunate to be appointed back in 2008. I quickly became engaged in a number of other issues. There's a lot more going on in the city than Japanese Gulch. And some of the ones that engaged me that I feel pleased that I've been able to have an impact on are pedestrian safety, the long-range planning committee, red light cameras, and sustainability and environmental issues. The pedestrian safety issues that I'm really pleased about that we were able to change was the pedestrian crossing down at 525 and Front Street. And I'd been there a number of times along with, I think, many other council members. We were surprised that no one ever got hurt or killed dodging the cars coming off the ferry. It was a dangerous and terrible circumstance. So working with the council and city staff and ferries, we were able to get that changed so that it's a lot safer now. It's not perfect, but it's a vast improvement over what we had. And I'm looking forward to when the ferry traffic moves off of that area entirely, and all we have down there is going to be people going to the park and to our businesses, and that'll make it a lot better. The other thing I was able to do is put some money in the budget one year for the safety improvements at OV for that crosswalk. There was just a sort of a sign above there that said crosswalk. Now we have lights, we have speed signs, we have radar patrol. This makes it a whole lot safer. It's much more comfortable to watch people use that now. And I want to continue to carry on that focus for pedestrian safety throughout the city for neighborhoods that want it. I know there's neighborhoods here who want cars to slow down, that we want to make our neighborhoods comfortable and safe for people to walk and say hello to their neighbors as a pedestrian instead of rushing through our cities. And I think I'm out of time, so we'll have to continue this forum and discussion in some other venue. But thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Emery. Mr. Champion, you have 3 minutes.
My thanks also to the Chamber and to the Beacon and to you, the citizens, for coming to listen to us. A little bit about me. I was born and raised in Ohio. I moved to Washington State in 1980, lived in Seattle, Redmond, Kirkland. Mary and I lived also in unincorporated Everett, and we moved to Mukilteo 10 years ago. My vision as we look to this city is to keep it unique, beautiful, and small. My background is in aerospace, and as I look to the future and where we're driving from a state perspective, which is to keep Boeing in the area, keep the aerospace manufacturing growing and thriving here, and the threats that we face with regards to the opening of service of commercial aviation traffic. I feel that my background and experience will work well in helping to find practical, common sense solutions to these issues, and that way would keep our community beautiful, unique, and small. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Champion. Candidates, we will now begin the prepared questions or the issues of concern. We will begin with Mr. Wheeler, then Ms. Preshaw for the first question. For the audience, we will rotate the questions through. Not every candidate will get the same question. In other words, position 1 has the first question, position 3 has the second, and we rotate them that way. Issue: waterfront development. Does the Mukilteo multimodal project and current redevelopment plans for the waterfront benefit Mukilteo? Defend your answer. Why or why not? Mr. Wheeler, you have 2 minutes.
I definitely believe it does. We just recently, the Air Force just recently turned over the property on the waterfront where we call, where it's known here as the tank farm, over to Everett, the Port of Everett. And once the ferry gets moved over in that area, Mukilteo will then, we're hoping that Mukilteo will have the land in there to work with on the waterfront to put a promenade in there. There's multiple areas that can be built and worked with there that can draw development in there that can bring in shops, stores, perhaps even a little tourism. It also enables us to move the parking from the Lighthouse Park over, which we're desperately needing. That is probably one of the nicest areas that we will have for waterfront. Right now, I don't believe that those tank farms is very pretty. And one of the things that I noticed is that the ferry terminal coming in there would, they've never built anything ugly. And it also gives activity. And I think that it's a positive for our city. It gives us something to work with. And I believe that we're going to prosper from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. Ms. Preshaw, would you like me to repeat the question? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Frank. I am emphatically against the current option that's being put forth, the Point Elliott option 2. I think it will be a disaster for Old Town and for the rest of Mukilteo. Specifically, do we really want a parking lot for our waterfront? Can I see a show of hands? Who wants a parking lot for a waterfront? I know I don't. And I'm glad to see you don't either. The option that we should be going back to, and I think it's a possibility because funding is not in place. And if funding is not in place, then nothing's in stone. We need to go back to no build because that's actually the option that makes sense. If we go back to no build, we can still have a ferry terminal that allows for two-tiered pedestrian and vehicular passenger acquisition and debarkation. We can have our waterfront, which could be developed into something wonderful for Old Town. We could have everything that we've always envisioned for Mukilteo. If we stick with the option that we have, then I think we're going to end up with a road up Japanese Gulch. Because you know what? There's no alternate route proposed. The only route proposed for this multimodal terminal that they have set forth is that 70-year-old bridge. What's going to happen if that bridge collapses during an earthquake? So I think if we go with Point Elliott option 2, we're going to end up with a road in Japanese Gulch, and I sure don't want that, and I don't think you do either.
Thank you, Ms. Preshaw. Moderators, point of order. When candidates pose a question to the audience, it's a rhetorical question, so that you don't have to feel like I've got to vote. So just want to let you know that. Thank you. Position number 3, you get question number 2, the issue, economic development. How do you propose Mukilteo bolster its economic development as the city eases out of the recession? Mr. Lord, you will get the opportunity to answer this first. Would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I understand it.
You have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. As a parks person for a dozen years, I was able to concentrate only on the green things, and it was really easy and it was quite fun. But when you get on the council, you have to figure out how to pay for things too. And so I had to change my perspective and expand it. And so being that way, it helped me to focus what I'm trying to do. And so we understand that we need to pay the bills, and we want to be able to do that by creating a business-friendly environment also. And then what we found out in Mukilteo, what seems to work well is 2 models. One is the restaurants and the taverns, and the second one, surprisingly, and not surprisingly, is the aerospace industry. We have many, many aerospace industries. So I'll talk about the restaurants first. Our staff is actually the city administrator's function. One of his main functions is to support and embrace and encourage and seek out additional businesses and developments. Many businesses approach the city looking for opportunities, and then at the same time we match them up to what the current empty lands are, existing buildings, and seeing if we can't match up our needs to their needs. Sometimes there are things that people want that we don't have, and we actually work with them. And so, by the way, you see some of the restaurants coming in, and they're working out really well. What I really like being an engineer is that I'm more interested in the aerospace side, because I want the aerospace businesses here, because that means they pay engineering salaries, and you have engineering families, and so they make the money, and then they spend the money here, and it supports the restaurants and the shops. So I've actually worked with Electro Impact and other companies like that. When they wanted to expand, they asked the city, can we do things to make it better for them? And we actually adjusted our zoning in a place that was palatable to all and allowed them to put in one of their brand new buildings that supported greater growth. And now you'll see that they're about to expand even further. So you combine businesses, you combine aerospace, and you get what you need.
Thank you, Mr. Lord. Mr. Taylor, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, thank you, sir.
You have 2 minutes.
I'm going to introduce, hopefully for the last time, my use of the word vision. My vision for economic development in Mukilteo involves a mass revision of certain plans and assumptions that have been going on here in the last few years. The biggest problem I see throughout Mukilteo has to do with infrastructure, transportation, roads, traffic safety, and it tied in with the direction that Mukilteo has taken over the last few years toward, and I'm exaggerating, making us somewhat, the whole city, a park and bike trails and walking trails, but still no sidewalks. There is very little development area left for homes, for businesses. We all know the difficulties businesses in Old Town have in staying open, like my favorite little fish restaurant, of course, is gone. And I think that we have been putting the cart before the horse, so to speak, in a lot of our development vision, our master development plan, all the wonderful plans for the waterfront. I think we need to slow down on all that and figure out, first of all, how to pay for any of this without raising more taxes. How to make it easier for people to get to and from our businesses, especially up here. And those are among the things I'd like to address to improve our economic picture here.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Question number 3, We'll go to position number 2, and we'll start with Mr. Emery. Issue, Payne Field. What is your position on commercial air service at Payne Field? What do you see as Mukilteo's role in the fight against commercial air services? Is the fight over or far from over? Would you like me to repeat that, sir?
No, thank you.
You have 2 minutes.
I can't think of anything that would be worse for Mukilteo than passenger air service at Payne Field. I think we would get serious economic, environmental, and mobility issues and consequences, and we would get very little benefit, if any, from that happening. The city has been engaged in a struggle to keep passenger service out of Payne Field for a number of years, and I expect it will continue to do so. There is the overriding problem is that the FAA has given money to the airport, and there is a requirement that the airport may have to institute passenger service if an airline is prepared to pay all the costs of making that happen. So what the city can do, there's 2 things the city can do about this, or 3 actually. The first thing is to keep working with the airport, with their economic development, with some regional leaders and the state to promote the creation of more opportunities for aerospace business at the airport. The more space that's used up by businesses and other uses, the less space there is for commercial air traffic. The second thing we can do is pursue our lawsuit, which is an effort to require the FAA to hold the airlines and any applicant to the highest possible environmental standards that we can contrive, with the idea that if it gets too expensive for an airline to come in to meet all the mitigation requirements, they won't do it. This has been a really effective method in keeping developments happening from all around the country in many locations, and this is one of our goals at this point. And the third path is to we keep working on lobbying on the state and national level to get the airport designated as an airport of national significance. It actually turns out that Payne Field and the businesses associated with it are a major economic engine, $20 billion a year in economic activity, one of the highest levels in the airport in the country. Having commercial air traffic would disrupt that and threaten that in substantial ways. So we're going to keep working in that direction too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Emery. Mr. Champion, would you like me to repeat the question?
Thank you.
Sir, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I fully understand the FAA's next generation air traffic system and their plans for what I call KPAE or Payne Field. I believe an option that we need to put on the table, and I agree with Mr. Emery, is we need to be the voice of change that says to the governor, to our legislatures, both at the state and federal level, that commercial service at Payne Field is a risk to Boeing's manufacturing plans for their 787 and the 777X. I say this because major corporations, one of their key elements in how they look to do business is risk mitigation. If you noted, Boeing's been very silent on this issue. Boeing has also said that they're weighing all of their options. We need to elevate this. The governor has said that we cannot overstate the importance of Boeing and the aerospace industry to the state of Washington's economy. I think if we get the support of the governor and the support of both Cantwell and Murray, we can drive a rule change that would allow Payne Field to be designated as an airport of significance and thus stopping commercial service.
Thank you, Mr. Champion. Question number 4 goes back to position number 1. Ms. Preshaw, you will answer the question first. The issue, Japanese Gulch. How do you propose the city pay for the last undeveloped 98 acres of Japanese Gulch, which has been estimated to cost $6.3 million? Ms. Preshaw, you have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, I'd like to do a little sidebar comment on the negotiation process for this piece of property. I really think we did not serve ourselves well when we go to the folks who are offering to sell this property and say, gee, we think it's going to be worth around $6.25 million. That's how much we're going to try and raise, and we're telling everyone that we're going to try and raise that amount of money when there wasn't even an assessment. there wasn't even a price determined as to how much the seller was willing to sell this property. So we kind of put ourselves in a bad position in the first place. Due diligence and hard questions being asked first would have avoided that problem. Now, to move on to the question specifically, I do not support councilmanic bonds for the purchase of Japanese Gulch. We already went down that path with Rose Hill. We ended up with over $18 million worth of debt at the height of the worst recession ever. I don't think we want to go there again. What I do support, though, is finding cuts in the budget, other monies that are unused in the budget, and allocating those towards the purchase. I would also support looking for grants, seeking private donations. I love the Gulch. I spend a lot of time there, and I desperately want to save it, but I'm not willing to put our city's economic health on the line to do so. We can't. We've already done that, and look what we have. A beautiful community center, but we also have a debt that's going to last for a long, long time.
Thank you, Ms. Preshaw. Mr. Wheeler, would you like me to repeat the question? Sir, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. The Japanese Gulch, to me, is one of the most important parts of land, or will be one of the most important parts of land for the city of Mukilteo. And I have to agree that we don't have an estimated cost back yet. As a matter of fact, the appraisal hasn't been returned yet. It's expected within the next month or so. We have $4.3 million set aside that it was given to the city just last Monday at City Council. The checks were presented, and that's sitting aside. I believe that once we get the appraisal back, then we can make an appropriate decision as to what we can offer for the balance, or if there is a balance, to be paid for the Japanese Gulch. And I do know that one thing I don't want to ever do is make decisions without having all of the information about that. And I don't think any of us here have all of that information. I do believe that if the Japanese Gulch appraiser comes back and it is higher, the funds will be there. I can't say why or how they will be there, because I don't think it's going to be in the time that I'm going to have before the council. I think it will be next year once I'm on council. So let's get the facts together. Once we have the facts, then we can make an appraisal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. Question number 5 is for position number 3. Mr. Taylor, we will begin with you. Issue: taxes. The city has raised property taxes over the last several years, 1% in 2012 and 3% in 2013, and started collecting a utility tax, 1% in 2013, to help balance the budget. What is your stance on raising taxes to help close the gap? Sir, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Foster. Well, you've all heard the expression tax and spend. You collect a lot of money in taxes and then decide where it goes. Now, that is not the best way to do things. What we have here, apparently, is a spend and tax system where you make budget decisions, proceed with projects, and then try to figure out where the money's going to come from. I do not believe in deficits. I do not believe in deficit spending. I believe in figuring out what something's going to cost. If it's approved, to implement it at that cost, and hopefully have a little money left over, but certainly not running the whole. We've been running deficits here for several years, and they are accumulating, and accumulating deficits become, a real liability. And we are a small town with a tax base that is not likely to increase a great deal from this point on. We're getting to the point where raising taxes is going to be the norm as more desires become fulfilled around here. People want more of this, they want more of that, and we still don't have sidewalks. We may have a wonderful bike trail to the Boeing plant, but we still don't have safe streets to walk on, at least in my neighborhood. So I believe more in proper planning, counting the cost of something before you do it, finding the money for it. If you don't have the money for it, figure out a good way to finance it. It's not going to become a further burden on the citizens.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Mr. Lord, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I understand it.
You have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Mukilteo and the entire country suffered what we now hear and call it as the Great Recession, and it has been an amazing impact on the entire country. Of course, it affected Mukilteo also. But because we were blessed with a large excess balance, so to speak, of taxes that are already collected, we collectively chose way back in 2009 to not raise taxes, but to burn that balance down because it was already taxed to the citizens. We actually chose, because the interest rates were at all-time lows and because construction costs were at all-time lows, we actually found that it was the best interest to bond this and pay it out over 20 years, so we didn't have to throw the $7 million at it at one time. That allowed us to pay other things as we worked our way through to weather the storm. What we found was over that period, over 6 years, every year we went back and cut back the budget about 5% from one to another. It had been about a 30% cutback before we ever even considered taxes. That was our last choice. Throughout all of that, we never had laid off police, we never laid off fire. We continued to provide services. Only when we finally got down to the point that we had to continue to figure that out, we started doing a little bit there because we had to diversify our base. We were only dependent on real estate excise tax. And as we saw that it was going down, we had to do a little bit. Now that we're starting to come out of the recession, we're starting to be able to look back and see if we really need all of those taxes. Throughout all of that, I support balanced budgets. And through this entire effort, the city has still maintained its AAA rating, which is a very rare occurrence throughout the whole place. And because of long-range financial planning, we are looking to the future, and we now know what exactly is going to happen, and we know what's going to happen not just 3 months, but all the way out there to 6 months, 5 years, 10, even 20 years.
Thank you, Mr. Lord. Question number 6 goes to position number 2. Mr. Champion, you will begin. Issue, full-time mayor. Does Mukilteo need a full-time mayor and a full-time administrator? Why or why not? Sir, you have 2 minutes.
Well, yes, I believe Mukilteo does need a full-time mayor and a full-time administrator. We have a strong mayor-council government. We've voted on that in the past, and that's what we, the citizens, have elected on. But we live in very interesting and unique times. Those times require a skilled individual who can work with our city people, our neighboring cities, our state, and our federal representatives. That's a boatload of work. But the people that work in the city also deserve management that they can go to and rely on, and that is a full-time work. So I do believe that we need both positions full-time.
Thank you, Mr. Champion. Mr. Emery, do you wish me to repeat it?
Oh, thank you.
You have 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you. I believe we need both a mayor and a full-time city administrator for much the same reasons that Mr. Champion mentioned. I think there's a number of issues that are regional in nature that we need someone out in the wider community to represent and advocate for Mukilteo's interests. I think that's a full-time job. We have the ferry development, we have economic development, we have Painfield issues, we have a number of other things that impact Mukilteo. If we weren't out there in the community advocating for ourselves, no one else is going to do that, and we'll get kind of run over. We're kind of a small town surrounded by a bunch of bigger towns, and no one out there is looking out for us except us. So I think that's the role of the mayor, to be out there and advocating for Mukilteo and helping us bring things in here and deal with things so that what happens is the best thing we can get for Mukilteo. But in the meantime, the city needs to be managed, and the city administrator needs to be doing that, as well as helping with some economic development activities to help improve our position economically over time. So I would think if at some point in the future we find that we're not in the middle of regional issues and we have settled some of these projects and things have calmed down, it would be a good time to re-examine that. But certainly for the next several years, I fully support the staffing we have now.
Thank you, Mr. Emery. Question number 7 goes to position number 1. Mr. Wheeler, you'll begin first. Issue, build out. Mukilteo has less than 5% of land left to build homes in the city. What do you propose the city do with the developable land that is left? Sir, you have 2 minutes.
Well, that's an interesting question because, if I'm not mistaken, Mukilteo doesn't have the authority of what's being done. It's the owners of the land that what's going to be done, but they just have to abide by the codes, the builder's codes. So as far as the city goes, there's really nothing that they can do except make sure that whoever builds on whatever property is left, that they do abide by the codes for that area.
Thank you, Mr. Wheeler. Ms. Preshaw, would you like me to repeat the question?
No.
Ms. Preshaw, you have 2 minutes.
Indeed, the owners control their property. However, their property is subject to more than just building codes. They are subject to zoning codes. So the city does have some degree of control in terms of what zone are these properties located in, and is there any fine-tuning in terms of those zoning requirements that the city is able legally to do? So it really depends where the property is located, what is the zone, and what plans does the developer have, and how does that, fit into our community, and is it legally possible to do anything to change an outcome that may look undesirable?
Thank you, Ms. Preshaw. Question number 8 goes to position number 3. Mr. Lord, you will begin. Issue, City Council. If elected, how will you ensure collaboration with the council, new members, and the veteran members? Sir, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I'm actually glad you asked me that one because I kind of consider that my strong suit. Almost everybody I talk to, whether it's at Boeing or it's here or it's on the council or in Park and Arts or even if I'm a chaperone chairman, people have discovered that what I'm able to do is to pull all sides together, separate the anxiety and the emotion, and learn what everybody's needs are. And what I do is I talk to everybody and understand what they need, and we see if we can't find a collaborative consensus decision. I believe that collaboration is one of my strong points. And in fact, one of the surprising things is I became council president because the council itself keeps asking, who is the best representative, and I get elected. I've been to council president 5 times. What I found also is all the different organizations I come to, I don't really seek the leadership, but I ask the fair questions, and then next thing you know, I'm the vice chair of the finance committee at the Regional Fire Authority. Not because I want it, but because they know that I will be fair and I won't drive my own agenda. Even as a council president, I find that I sacrifice my agenda to listen carefully to what they do. So with the new council members and the existing council members, I plan on talking with them. I plan on understanding what's important to them and sharing what we need to know. They know that I'm highly accessible. They know that I'm their voice when we develop the agenda. And they know that when we need to get some stuff done, I will be able there and I'll be able to represent them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lord. Mr. Taylor, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, sir, thank you.
Mr. Taylor, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I'm not sure how you can ensure anything in a situation like this. I can only speak for myself in that, as I've indicated, I I have a very varied business past, and I am going to tend to look at each situation that comes up from an accounting standpoint, from a practicality standpoint, and I'm simply going to make my case and try to, if I'm opposed, I'm going to try to understand the other members' positions and work with them. There's no sense in being a standalone rock against a tide. On the other hand, I don't think, and this addresses the second part of the question, I don't think that it's necessarily my job to always collaborate with anybody's vision, whether it's the mayor's, whether it's a majority of the council. I don't always think that vision is a wonderful thing. I think that we need solid management, regulated growth, careful budgeting and careful prioritizing of things that need to be done for the residents of the city first. I want to put the residents of the city first. If that means not agreeing with everybody on the council, that's what it means. I may win sometimes, I may lose sometimes. I'm a very reasonable person, so I can be persuaded, and I'm not ashamed of being shown if I'm mistaken. So I guess that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Question number 9 is for position number 2. We'll start with Mr. Emery. The issue, coal trains. Are coal trains an issue in Mukilteo? Why or why not? If they are, what would you propose the city do to keep them from passing through Mukilteo? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I think coal trains are an issue. I was at a party over the weekend where someone approached me as a topic of conversation was coal trains. He wanted to know what the city was doing. He was very concerned about what would happen. And I learned a few things there. One is that if the coal trains happen, there'll be 9 trains a day to start, and they're a mile long. So we would have 9-mile-long trains coming through Mukilteo. Even though we don't have crossings that would be disrupted, we'll have that noise and disruption and the coal dust. And that's the other thing I learned was coal dust is a real problem. There's a loading facility up in Canada where the Canadians spray their coal 24/7 with water, constantly, continuously to keep the coal dust down. And yet Point Roberts has a serious problem with coal dust, and they're a long ways away across the water. Coal dust just travels, it carries, and it's a problem. It affects people with respiratory conditions very badly, and it is, of course, the source of black lung disease in minors. So all of this is an issue for Mukilteo because of those reasons, if nothing else. But I think we also have to look at this both individually and as a community about whether or not we really want to support and collude with removing resources from our country, shipping it overseas to China, where after it's burned, it will contribute to climate change, and then the pollution from that will come back to join us because that's the way the wind blows. This is a bigger issue than just Mukilteo and trains on our waterfront, and we think we need to think through that and what we want to do about it. What the city has done is authored a letter. The mayor and the council signed this, requiring or asking that the people who do the environmental studies and the surveys do so with the most stringent requirements and regulations that can be applied to see if this works. We'll continue to do that. We'll continue to work with the regional and local and state people to see what we can do to impact this so it doesn't happen here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Well, my understanding is that Burlington Northern is saying that each day at least 4 coal trains go through Snohomish County. Those trains are on their way up to Canada, and they are going to ship the coal off to China. That's all true. The number of those trains will increase. Currently in the state of Washington, I think over the next 2 years, they're looking at even developing a coal export plant in Whatcom County. So, yes, it's going to be an issue. In addition to the elements that Mr. Emery mentioned, other concerns that we have to look at are we continually have slope failures here. And there is the possibility that a slope failure could impact the train, knock coal into the water, and cause major pollution standards. So those are some of the other issues that we need to look at. I agree with the working with our regional and local councils to see what other impacts that we can help put in place to avoid this become a potential catastrophe for the city.
Thank you, Mr. Champion. We are at the point where we're going to take a 15-minute break. When we reconvene, we'll address questions submitted from the community. If you would like to write a question and submit it, please, there's a table out there. This ends our first section. Now you may applaud.